So let's talk about the Prophet Agabus. Agabus, really interesting guy. He appears in the book of Acts. And it's interesting because first of all, he is a prophet. He makes these predictions about the future. But secondly, his predictions, there are two of them in Acts. The first one, everyone listens to him. And the second one, Paul kind of like ignores. Really interesting. And so what Agabus kind of like teaches us about prophecy is that first of all, it is nuanced, and secondly, it requires discernment. So nuance and discernment. And so the two passages are Acts 11 and Acts 21. In Acts 11, the prophet Agabus appears and he makes this prophecy, this prediction about what's going to happen, and the whole world says there's going to be a famine. And the whole church takes him very seriously. They start raising funds, they start sending out Barnabas and Saul actually to bring this money, this aid to the other churches to get ready for this tragedy that's going to happen. And so what we see here is that people taking prophecy seriously, but also it's nuanced prophecy. It's prophecy about something that's going to be happening to individuals that's almost circumstantial, it's very personal, but it isn't doctrinal. It isn't going to change our understanding of God's word. It isn't going to form the basis of the New Testament witness, and yet that's prophecy. So that's the first thing we see, a kind of nuanced understanding of prophecy within the New Testament. But secondly, Agabus appears again in chapter 21, and this time he gives a prediction about what's going to happen to Paul if he goes to Jerusalem. And he says, Paul, if you go there, they're going to tie you up. You're going to be in danger. And so the moment everyone hears this, they say, oh, Paul, you better not go to Jerusalem. But Paul has a different kind of conclusion. He says, you know what, I need to go. And despite the warnings, Paul resolves to go to this place that God warns him it's going to cause him to get into trouble. And so what we see from this second instance is that there's a difference in opinion about what this prophecy means. And therefore, there's a difference in terms of the discernment when it comes to what the prophecy means. And so what we see from Agabus are two very important things. Firstly, there's nuance. Prophecy isn't maybe just about foundational or doctrinal content. It isn't just about forming a New Testament witness, and therefore when the New Testament was written, no more prophecy. But actually, it might be a bit more nuanced as to what its role is, as to how it might affect individuals, and it might even be occasional. So that's the first thing, nuance. But secondly, discernment. That just because you know without a doubt that this is a word from God, doesn't mean that you don't have to make a judgment call, doesn't mean that you might have differing opinions, and therefore you might actually be wrong in concluding what this prophecy means. So I hope that kind of like adds the kind of thinking as to what prophecy means in the New Testament, and even what prophecy means for us today. That actually, when you hear this word that supposedly comes from God, you need to understand, how it affects you personally, but also to make a judgment call. What is God actually calling me to do to respond to this in a wise way, in a way that really is in line with the rest of the New Testament revelation of God's will and God's purpose for us in His Word. So nuance and discernment.